Springs GM here again, back with another video. Today we're going to be talking about what I learned from my first campaign. But before we begin, I was just pausing the video and watching my previous one, which is how I created my first campaign. Just click over here. Don't worry, I'll wait. Alright, now that you've watched that, let's go ahead. Something I realized after uploading my previous video to YouTube is that it wasn't very clear on what I created my campaign for. So my first ever campaign I created was for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Now that that's cleared up, let's get on with the video. One thing I did learn from creating my first campaign was not to overplan. Now, I did mention this in my previous video about creating the towns, the villages, the castles, and the landscape of my world, and it was just way too much. And the reason this was the case is my players didn't even go visit some of those towns, or I created taverns that my players weren't even interested in. It was just a lot of extra world building that I just didn't need, and it could have been spent a lot better elsewhere. So another thing I overplanned was the factions. I worked out their hierarchy, the NPCs, the leaders, and every player basically in each faction. And this was really unnecessary as my players didn't really look into the factions, they didn't really follow up the hierarchy, and it was just something that could have been spent better elsewhere. In my most recent campaign, I did focus on the timeline and did plan it to about the same degree. However, it was focused on a smaller area, and this was much better and much more helpful. One thing I did learn from running my first campaign is that it's very important to give out the information on the world and the scene to the players, because without the information they easily get lost or confused what they can do. I also did find, however, that it is very important to not give them too many options. This may be just my players, but I found when I gave them too many quests or things to do, they became unsure of what to do. I did fix this, however, by kind of railroading them in a way to where I want them to go, by using events, NPCs to kind of give them a bit of a shove in the right direction. Something I did learn quickly is that my players didn't enjoy the long travel time between towns, villages, and castles. This may have been an issue with the scale that I use, which I didn't mention in my last video. However, I just think it was the players weren't really interested in having long travel times and they would way rather skip it. Because in my other games, I have long travel times between planets, and us players just love to muck around and do whatever we like and get to know each other and roleplay between those times. Something I did notice about my players, something I did learn, is that some players are very hesitant to trust NPCs. Like, I had NPCs who wanted to just guide them through a mountain or take them to a location, and they were very mistrusted of them and was always had their eye on them, waiting for them to betray them. I did kind of learn after this why this was the case, and it turns out that a lot of the DMs I had before me, they used NPCs to betray them, or they were very one-dimensional as just a shopkeeper and nothing else but a shopkeeper. I found this very irritating, but now I understand it. I do have some ways around that, and I will talk about them in my next video and how I create a campaign now, but I can understand their mistrust because of their previous experiences. As my first campaign was a battle between mortals, gods, and demons, it did create a bit of an unbalanced encounter sometimes. Sometimes some encounters were extremely easy, some were very difficult and unwinnable. Unwinnable encounters are okay, and unbalanced ones are also fine. In fact, my players did enjoy absolutely trouncing some encounters and having to run from others. And this did make the world feel a lot more alive, in their opinion. However, it was very important, and something that I did learn is not to have too many unwinnable encounters, because the players do need a win from time to time. Otherwise, you can just feel, what's the point? This is all beyond me. Another way to use those unwinnable counters is not necessarily have the party goal to defeat or stop them, but to protect someone or to complete a ritual by a certain amount of time. This way they have a goal that they can achieve, and they don't have to win the battle, they just have to hold it off for long enough. And this worked really well for my players. Something that's very important, and I did learn this in my first campaign, was to make sure you're giving consequences, good or bad, to your players for their actions. The example of this in my game is we had a dwarf who ran around telling people that dwarves existed, even though they were thought to be a legend. This backfired on him when one of my players from a human supremacist church decided to tell the church that dwarves did exist and where they were, and then there was a war against the church and dwarves, so that ended very badly for his people. But this is a perfect example of consequence here. He went around telling people that they were real and that he suffered those consequences. Same for my player who was from that church. A lot of the people in the church, as well as outside the church, hated the church because of that action. This relates back to my first video on why I left D&D regarding experience, as experience rewards the players on their action. So if you're giving out experience from killing monsters and killing things, the players are going to be killing things. So this is a way around that issue, is reward it from fulfilling goals and tasks or quests for them as they run around the world. Basically, the point of this is that you can reward the players on behavior that you like or that fits in your world that you have created. In my first campaign, encounter tables was something that really helped me and helped the players from traveling from area to area. This meant there were random things that would occur, including combat encounters and just events that would happen. This was a really fun way to do it, but I would advise make sure you have a good mix of good and bad encounters. I would advise not feeling constrained to use what you rolled on encounter tables, because if you are like me, I rolled the same encounter 3 times in the space of one game, which would be very boring. So feel free to cheat and just pick one above that roll or a couple down that, or just use whatever you want to do as well. Don't feel constrained to have to use encounter tables either. After running my first campaign, I did learn that it's very important to know your players, and this is actually my biggest bit of advice for anyone thinking about running a campaign. Make sure you know your players. I would suggest making sure you know who your quiet players are, your loud players, and who are those going to try and steal the most spotlight. Make sure you are using your GM skills to shine the spotlight on the quiet players and help wrap up those long, drawn-out, dramatic character moments. You can do this by just simply asking the quiet player, so what do you think we should do? Or, okay, now that's what they're doing, but what are you doing right now in the tavern? And just that sort of thing to give them some spotlight. Something I wish I did before I started running my first campaign is sit down with the players, get to know them, learn who was those quiet, loud players and dramatic players, and also find out what kind of campaign they would like. Because at the end of the day, my campaign was quite role-player and exploration heavy, where they were probably looking for a more combat heavy, and that's where I failed them. There's something I really wish I did do in my first campaign, is get everyone together, have that session 0, find out who the loud players, who the quiet players are, who the dramatic players are, and just find out what they wanted out of this game. I would have also liked to sit them down and create some connections between the players, so at least some people knew each other. That way, they weren't just a heap of randoms who I had to try and throw together. If I had done that and had those connections, I could have used those connections and those backstories to weave them into the story and make it a much more immersive experience. And that is something I do regret. But that was probably the biggest thing I did learn from this campaign, is it's so important to know your players. And if you know your players and you know what they're looking for, and you ask for that feedback at the end of a session, what they liked and what they would like to see more of and what they would like to see less of, you're going to create a great campaign anyway, because they're going to be enjoying it and so are you. At the end of the day, if we are asking for that feedback and we're getting that feedback, we can use that to better our craft and become better campaign creators and better DMs. If you're currently working on a campaign, or you've created one, or you've just got a crazy idea that you feel like sharing, put in the comments below. I'd love to hear about it. That way we can all support each other. If you did enjoy the video and you do want to show your support, please like, subscribe, and share. And also, don't forget, I have a Twitter. If you do want to follow me on Twitter, it is @SprinksDM, and you can follow me there for random bits of information, some characters, some RPG hooks, and what I'm doing in my other games.